Hey, welcome aboard for a Sunday morning with the A Game. I'm Rob Akampora, bunkered in Bradley Beach, New Jersey. This time, we're going to go a little sports. Haven't done that in a while. And round table. I know a few people who know what they're talking about when it comes to sports. In the middle, I bring a gentleman who was a part of my night show on WSTW back in the 2K generation. His prognosticating skills had a success rating of nearly 85%. The man knew how to pick games, no doubt about it. Bob Senkewicz, a.k.a. the Nostrababas, is here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akampora. How are you doing today?
Very good. And also, as part of this reunion of the clan of the WSTW WDEL clan in Wilmington, Delaware, Gene Dzielak, who has got Potadelphia, his new podcast. You can find that, and we'll give you more details on that. I'm glad to get Gene in here. And real quick, Gene, who's more disappointing, the 76ers or the Phillies right now?
I think the Sixers have just left us all sort of in a mild depression, even more so than
I'll tell you something. With all that talent, I mean, credit to Coach Brown. He got them to a certain level, but it seemed like he could never get them past that where they were. And this was kind of disappointing considering where they were the year before.
Yeah, and I think more than anything, it was a case of, and I don't know if you follow them close enough to realize how bad their splits between home and away were.
No, I didn't.
They were a horrible, like historically bad road team. So then when you go into Orlando, where every game is on the road.
Yeah, it's true.
It was not a situation where they were set up for any kind of success in the playoffs.
Guys, we're going to do a little tribute to a little show that's been on ESPN for several years. If we have time, Dave Walls from ABC 13 in Virginia will be the fourth member of the panel, and hopefully he will chime in. But in the meantime, we're going to get started with the first quarter. And in the first quarter, let's go to the beginning of the pandemic. As we began, the first sports to come back on TV were the PGA Tour. There was NASCAR. And Ming, show us the surprise sport of cornhole. Indeed. Who would have thought that sport would suddenly get major coverage on ESPN? And we're not talking about the Ocho. They got major coverage on ESPN too. Guys, first question. What sport has benefited the most during the pandemic? Bob.
You just said it. Golf. If you ask me, golf was the first one out of the box. They came back with the biggest splash. They came back with their primary names. And not only that, they're on television 4 days a week. Golf Channel is a staple, and before when the pandemic started and they did come back as a regular sport again, they were not just being on Golf Channel 4 days a week. They were on primary NBC, CBS Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they were the first guys out of the box, got the most attention, and brought back people that were wanting to look for something. So to me, they got the biggest bump out of everything. You can make an argument, for Major League Baseball because they're still playing in their stadiums, but the NHL, as much as I love it, playing in their bubble, and the NBA playing in their bubble, the presence in the community is not there. And the PGA Tour doesn't need the presence in the community to have its impact because it's such a scattered sport that you're not location dependent upon your fandom. This is, I like this golfer, I like that golfer, these are my favorites. So to me, that's the sport that got the biggest bump out of everything coming out of the pandemic.
Gene, what do you think?
I think that a couple of things depends on how you look at success or how you look at getting a bump. I think that all the sports across the board sort of have taken a hit. I think that just the fact that sports have become more politicized. I think that some fans have decided that they don't want to mix their politics and sports and have turned away. You can see that there's certainly been ratings that have fallen in sports that had traditionally had high ratings. I think much like Bob said, some of the Bob said, not bobsled.
That's a different sport altogether.
That maybe bobsled will have a big bump. Who knows? But I think a lot of the individual sports, things like F1 racing, which is something I didn't follow at all, but certainly was able to take a look at when things first came back, and NASCAR. I think that that's another thing that it's not super dependent on having fans. You don't necessarily get a big surge of energy from. I'm sure that racing in front of 400,000 people is exciting, but I think behind the roar of an engine, you're really just trying to make sure you make that left turn correctly. But very honestly, and maybe this is a personal thing, or at least local to what we've been doing. I think that in the Philadelphia area, maybe the one that the sport that got the biggest bump, or at least drew more eyeballs than it had previously, was the MLS. Yes, they went also into a bubble, but they were able to come back into a tournament that kind of, whether you bought in or not, it certainly had stakes. I think that when the NBA first came back, they were in sort of an end of season mode, and some of those games, they didn't have a lot of real stakes. So the MLS coming in with a group round robin tournament, certainly the Union playing well in it helped get people around here talking. But I would say that as a league that has tried for years and years to try and find a foothold, maybe MLS, and we'll see going forward, was able to sort of get a little momentum out of this.
Let me give you some interesting numbers, and to defend Bob's point a little bit about the golf. CBS's coverage of golf this season is up almost 10% in viewership, according to the Nielsen ratings. PGA Championship in the first round, which was getting coverage outside CBS, it was the highest ratings that they had in television in nearly 5 years. NASCAR, very interestingly enough, is seeing a similar kind of bump on the Fox coverage. Even last week, comparison from last year to this year on that stop on the NASCAR circuit, a 31% jump in ratings. It seems as though golf, to me, is getting more of an exposure that they've never really had before. I mean, you're right about having other networks like the Golf Network covering it, but more people seem to be flocking to it because in the middle of the pandemic, when there was no other option, suddenly you're watching and kind of going, hey, this isn't so bad.
Well, and it was showing up on every other network. You had CBS, you had NBC, you had TNT and TBS picking up coverage. It was and the Golf Channel for the hardcores. So it was when it first started as the first sport out of the box, it was everywhere.
Right.
I also think one of the things that may have helped golf was it was one of the few things you could still do. So
that's a very good point. Very good point.
If you were around and you were looking for something to do, golf courses to a certain degree, or like places like Topgolf, those were the places that were still sort of coming back, and so you could still get together socially distant with your buddies, and you could still go out and play golf, which I think then sort of gave you that, maybe spark that interest, so that when you sat down the next week, maybe if you weren't out on the course, you wanted to watch some other people, doing, maybe I'll pick up a tip or two. If I just watch Phil Mickelson, maybe I'll learn his chip shot. I don't know that actually is helpful, but I think
and golf is very much, Gene, I don't remember if you play or not, but golf is very much a sport about, I was there, I hit that shot, I tried that hole, and watching the players play on the pro tour, there were some golfers as they were starting back up that exhibited very much the same type of behavior that us hackers do, having, shots that you look and you shake your head and go, how did he hit that? And where did that ball go? And it wasn't going where it was supposed to go. So there was a lot more of an identification happening with people, with golfers having, I forget, there were a couple of in the early tournaments that were played, there were a couple of golfers that were putting card in 8s, 9s, and 10s, and that was the rarity. Now all of a sudden, every tournament was having a couple of guys doing that.
Yeah,
there was an identification factor going on there.
I also think that event where they had Tom Brady and Phil Mickelson and Tiger Woods and Peyton Manning all play together, partly just because those are huge names, and partly because the way they did the broadcast. They basically had you in there next to the caddy, the way they shot it. And I think that was one of the first times in a major sporting event, even though it was sort of an entertainment event more than a sporting event, where you really felt like you were out there hanging out with these guys. I don't know that you could do that with a lot of other sports. So
and the word is, by the way, is that the network is considering doing that again in 2021 because the ratings were that good.
I think that would be foolish not to try to run it back.
And to wrap up the first quarter, admittedly, who watched Cornhole when it was on?
I watched Cornhole back when ESPN first started.
There you go. And a very interesting fact, since the three of us at one point were in Wilmington, Delaware, working for WSTW and WDEL, one of the stops that was on ESPN by the way, sponsored by Johnsonville Brats, was in Wilmington, Delaware. Who would have thought?
Nice.
All right, let's go second quarter. Let's talk sports in the bubble. Now, Major League Baseball came out within the last couple of days saying they're waiting on approval for their bubble to happen during the playoffs. Meanwhile, as we know, the NBA is doing their bubble thing. And Ming, if you give us a photo of how it looks like in the NBA bubble, they've had the virtual fans set up inside their bubble, and it seems to have sparked some interest as far as how it looks aesthetically on television. It's actually had a decent look. Meanwhile, in the NHL end, if we can get the NHL photo up here, it seems kind of spooky in a weird way to watch. Not that one. That's baseball, but we'll get to that. Again, Go back. There you go. It's kind of cool to get that kind of angle, but it is kind of spooky to see that really just empty arena with hockey. But as far as the bubble is concerned, out of the NBA and the NHL, who has thrived, do you think, more in the bubble overall, whether it be performance, television, what have you? Gene, I'll start with you this time.
I just think the product of the NHL has been a little bit better. I think that there has been, I certainly think the looks of the NBA, it seems almost to feel a little more normal, having the virtual fans. You can sort of blend mentally into that aesthetic that you're kind of used to seeing. But I don't know. I thought that hockey, once the games got going, hockey to me felt the most still like NHL playoffs. Now, caveat being, I'm a Sixers and Flyers fan. Obviously, NHL success in Philadelphia.
By the way, hence the reason this podcast is called Potadelphia. That should give you a clue.
So, so I think that I certainly watched a lot more of the NHL playoffs because we were involved for a lot longer. But I've watched some more of the NBA playoffs, and I'm starting to have a little bit more of the same sensation that as the playoffs have kind of gone on, you start to see the quality of play stepping up, and you start to get the same sort of intensity. But I would say just a slight edge to the NHL for it feeling the most like the NHL playoffs that you know and love, at least to me.
Bob, I know you're a hockey fan, so I'm going to think you're going to lean NHL.
Not just lean. I'm fully on the side of the NHL for a number of reasons. And the first one is, you talk about the paper cutouts, the cardboard cutouts that they put in the stands. And I know a lot of the Major League Baseball teams have done that in their arenas, but they've also done the same thing that the NHL has done in Toronto and Edmonton, where they basically took the tarp and covered the seating area that you would see on camera, so you're not staring at all these empty seats. Mm-hmm. So to me, that kind of takes a lot of that out of the picture, if you will, because also when you're talking about hockey and basketball as well, the camera is on the action that's on ice or on the court. Until they take that wide angle shot, you don't really see that. Mm-hmm. And the difference for those of us watching the game is hearing the fan reaction when the game occurs. Mm-hmm. And the networks covering the games have gone to this simulated crowd noise. And I can't remember if some of that they pumped it into the arena or if it's just on camera. So it's simulating that concept that there are people there and removing that layer of extrapolation of, nothing more than hearing the skates cut around the ice, mm-hmm. or the sneakers squeaking on the floor. So to me, that's the fan thing is not a big issue. Mm-hmm. You see more of that in baseball because as a ball gets hit and it goes up in the air and the camera widens out, you see more of the stand. So right. To me, that's not as big of an issue. To me, the biggest difference, Gene's right about one thing. The play in the NHL has been, for what has happened, has been of an extraordinary level as far as I'm concerned. And I'm a Ranger fan, and we were out. We played 4 games and didn't.
Right.
And I think we scored 5 goals. So, but I've been watching because the games have been that good. And while I don't know if I would say it was at the same level of intensity that you see in a normal year, but it's darn close. And anybody who's a hockey fan knows that playoff hockey, if a regular hockey game on a scale of 1 to 10, the intensity is a 3. When you get to the playoffs, it's a 49. It's just that much more different. I think the biggest difference between everything, quite frankly, when you talk about the bubbles and thriving the bubbles more, and this is going to be an extraordinarily controversial comment, I think it has to do with the social justice acceptance and consciousness that the NBA has displayed versus what the NHL has done. And I think that aspect is something that most people, and I'm not saying everybody, but most people don't want to see in their athletes. They want to watch them play the game. They want to see them exhibit their skills. They don't want social commentary from the players that are in the game. That's not why you come to the game. That's not why you watch the game. That's usually not why you're a fan of a team. Now, I'm not saying they don't have a right to do it and that it's wrong to do it. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is that it is a big turnoff to a lot of people who the answer is, I watch my sports as an escape. I don't want it to be a social commentary. All respect to the people who are doing it. I just think that the level that's been done in the NBA versus the NHL makes a huge difference. And I think that's a big part of it as well.
I think the NBA has taken a little bit of a hit because they want to associate the drop in the ratings because of what's happening with their social messaging. I think that's completely wrong. Don't forget, NBA is getting coverage at times that normally would have been prime time. The way they've staggered the playoffs, because they're in a bubble, you're getting games being played at 12:30 in the afternoon.
Yes.
You can't expect to match the ratings of what you would have if it was let's say, 7:30 tip-off going into prime time.
Correct.
So the league in itself is suffering from that more than anything else. Ironically, the NHL is about the same in the ratings, which is, I think, a credit to them because they also have the same problem.
Now, bear in mind, the NBA had much higher ratings to try to live up to than the NHL had.
Very, very
and
true.
So the NHL picking up games at 12:30, at 3:30, at 5:30 is not as bad as what it's going to do the NBA. What it also, though, says to me is that the NHL keeping and exceeding their previous ratings, even though they're airing at those other times, says more about people coming into the NHL.
And Rob, one other thing I think that maybe is sort of lost is I don't think the NBA playoffs is even the biggest basketball event in the year. I think the biggest basketball event in the year was a casualty of the lockout. Of the shutdown.
The NCAA tournament you're referring to.
I think that's one of those things that I don't know that reality of what a world without sports was going to be like until all of a sudden. I mean, literally, the conference tournaments were in play as the sort of pandemics sort of hit, and then all of a sudden. What is a month-long basketball festival, essentially. Certainly something that I think people not only look forward to that are basketball fans, but just people that work in offices look forward to. And if you sort of eliminated a huge thing that sort of drives interest and enthusiasm for basketball, and I think that it can't be completely dismissed that losing that sort of momentum and then the sport of basketball basically going quiet for months, and then coming back in a way that doesn't necessarily resemble like the prime time NBA that you're used to. I think that's why the product sort of feels less interesting, less entertaining, there's a little less juice to it.
Interesting side note, Mike Krzyzewski, the head coach at Duke University, had recently said if they have to cancel the NCAA tournament a second year in a row, you might as well just scrub college basketball off the gate because they're going to go broke. So I think it's going to be a very important thing to watch when we get to the NCAA season, how they're going to handle this and see how they're going to handle the tournament, if they have to bubble it, how will it work, especially when you're dealing with 68 teams and trying to maybe divide it up in between 5 major cities? I think it's the only way it can work.
I'm going to throw another thought out there, and this is not sports related, but sports related.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the college sports are coming off the books. And college football, college basketball, even college baseball. A lot of schools are canceling their seasons and stopping their sports.
Yes.
As we all know, college sports is a huge funding revenue channel for these institutions to pay for a lot of what they do. Mm-hmm. I'm very curious as to what's going to happen if they keep canceling these sports, to how much it's going to cost kids to go to school, and what's going to happen to all these kids. And I'm saying that as a guy who my daughters are now gone. I don't have to worry about this, but I have a lot of folks that I know whose kids are in school. I just knowing how expensive college is today anyway, when you take out that revenue stream, I wonder what's going to happen to college, the tuition prices to begin with. There's already enough yelling and screaming over college costs too much. I wonder what's going to happen because of that. And if you pull out the March Madness, if you pull out the Final Four, if you pull out the NCAA football championships, you are so crippling what these schools get, and it'll be very interesting to see where that goes. Not sports related, but sports related.
And funny, you are setting up a little bit of my fourth quarter, so we'll dive into that a little bit more when we get to it.
Yep.
Gentlemen, take a breather. It's halftime, and at halftime, this is a chance for me to do a little promoting. Gene's podcast is called Podadelphia. If we can put the logo up there so people can find where they can find the podcast. Gene, where's the streaming service for you these days?
We podcast sort of to everything. All your major podcast providers, your iTunes, your I think we're even up on Amazon now. But if you listen to podcasts, you'll find us. Just type in Podadelphia. It's myself and my two co-hosts, Chuck Siders and Dave Diorio. We went to college together, and essentially the best way I can describe our show is if you hung out with your three best friends and all rooted for the same team, and you've always wanted to be like, man, we should just record these conversations because other people would be entertained. Well, that's kind of what we're providing through our show. I like to think of us as sort of like the sports entertainment of the Philadelphia area. We led off our very first show. We talked about not necessarily a team, but we talked about mascots. Just sort of give you a sense of what we are. We take ourselves very seriously until we're not taking ourselves seriously at all. We're big fans of both the Fanatic and Gritty. We have not necessarily come down completely hard on either on either side of that one. But like I said, if you're okay with a little bit of laughs with your sports commentary, that's us at Podadelphia.
Good stuff. Bob, to get everybody a little bit of a clue, when you started picking games for me back in the day, you did the ultimate parlay bet, which paid off huge. Now, this involved Deion Sanders. Tell the story.
Well, when we first started this, Rob came to me with the idea of doing the football pick bit for the radio, where we would have callers come in and challenge me, and if they got more right than I got, they would win a prize, which was basically some comps at a local restaurant.
Yes.
And in the very first week we were running the bit, I says after giving my picks for the week, I decided to try and throw a little something extra in there just for a little entertainment purposes, but just in looking at the NFL season as a whole. And I said, Rob, I got a parlay pick for you. And he's like, whoa, wait, what is this? What are you talking about? I said, well, I got a parlay pick. I said, I got an over-under. And he said, what are you talking about over-under? I said, Deion Sanders, 3 weeks before he's on the injured reserve list. And he was like, you got to be kidding me. I said, no, honestly, 3. And this was after I think he was with San Francisco at the time. This is when he had come back with San Francisco.
Right.
I said, 3 weeks, he'll be on the IR list. And we thought it was a joke, and we all had a good laugh about it. And that week, he pops his hammy. He's gone for the season. It was a little prophetic, you might say. I was looking at how old Dion was and where he
Right.
was at and the position he was playing, and I said, you know what, this is not going to last. And I kind of I was throwing it out there partly in jest, but partly skeptical about his ability to stay healthy, and it just kind of worked out right for me.
It really did, and it set the tone for a 3-year run with me doing those
Mhm.
picks, and I thank you for that. And
I
by the
thank
way,
you.
you can find Bob. It will be coming out more in the next couple of months. A short film he did called The Seventh Day. If we can get the photo of his role in the film, it just won an award last night at the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival. There you are, sir.
There I am without my glasses.
Exactly. Worked with Ernie O'Donnell, who is from
Yep.
Clerks, who's got a lot of great stuff going on. Looking forward to seeing this. When we get more information, we'll let everybody know where they can find the film and check it out. It's a really good piece of work.
And I'm also in pre-production for a film that I wrote, and I'm going to be the star in, called Initiative. Hopefully, we'll get it done once the pandemic allows us to be able to shoot it.
Good stuff. All right, guys, let's dive back into it. We're in the third quarter, and the third quarter is baseball. Now you can put up the fake fans in baseball. We'll set the drop on this.
Yep.
Because when we look at this season, it's been a season that has seen, 7-inning games, the universal designated hitter rule, speed rules, and extra innings. The Marlins, their roster at one point looked like a double-A minor league team. We had huge spikes in pitching injuries. We've had the fake fans. We've had fake noise. We've had coming a 16-team playoff. So what is the biggest surprise of this 2020 season, knowing that I just spouted off a bunch of stuff, Bob?
Well, I'm going to go off the board, Marty.
And it's potpourri for 200.
Yep. The biggest surprise to me has been the uproar over Fernando Tatis Jr. and his flaunting of the unwritten rules of baseball. Anybody who's played baseball for the longest time knows that a lot of those rules were about the respect for other players and make, the idea of, I don't want to be in your shoes, so I'm not gonna rub it in at any given point in time. Baseball and the attitude of the way players have developed over time have lost that level of mutual respect, and it's more about me. So the concept that he's not following those unwritten rules is not a shock to me. The reaction to it is, and I think a lot of baseball players today need to get off the pot, if you will, and stop being so personally insulted by these actions if everybody is doing them, because it's no longer an unwritten rule because everybody breaks it. Swinging at a pitch 3-0 used to be the thing that, you just didn't do it. That's gone by the wayside. Now, the idea of pitchers throwing at somebody after somebody had, to try and, get back at, somebody else, people get so annoyed at it. It's a part of the game, but they're now furious because, you're going to take away my livelihood. The respect and the unwritten rules, they're gone. There are new unwritten rules that have to be done, and we just don't know what they are yet. And the level of respect and reaction has to come down. And to me, that's the biggest surprise in the way the league has gone, is the fact that people have gone with the way the attitudes of players have changed, how crazy people have gotten over Fernando Tatis's non-adherence to the unwritten rules of baseball.
Gene, I get a feeling you're going nowhere near that.
Well, honestly, there's two things when I was thinking about it, there are two things that sort of jumped out at me as the biggest surprises in Major League Baseball. First of all, having grown up as a Phillies fan, I'm a National League fan, and initially I was unsure about how these rules changes might affect my enjoyment of the game. The idea of watching a baseball game where pitchers don't bat on a regular basis, and having to deal with and watching just the way a manager manages a major league game in the National League, right. That's one of the things that I really enjoy. And I have to say, one of the biggest surprises is I haven't missed it as much as I thought.
Oh, wow.
I really honestly have sort of taken to the idea of the universal DH. And more importantly, what really surprised me is how much I've enjoyed the new setup for extra innings.
What? I'm kind of surprised at that.
Now, I will say the other day we had a pitcher, Aaron Nola, going into a fifth inning where he was pitching. There was just a hit batter. That was the only base runner that the Marlins had. And there was a lot of conversation about, is it even the kind of thing where you don't speak of the no-hitter? It's only a 7-inning game. It was part of a doubleheader. Are we going to be putting on a jinx, and everything has been said that is not going to be a real no-hitter.
Bingo.
It's not.
Yep.
It's not a no-hitter.
Considered, no.
In the minor leagues, they will give you a 7-inning no-hitter, but not in the major leagues.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so, the conversation about the concept of a perfect game. You can't have a perfect game if you don't have 27 outs. It's just the whole idea is that it's 27 up, 27 down. You can't do that if you're lopping off the end. So at the end of the game, they had an interview with Aaron Nola. The broadcaster asked him if he had accomplished a no-hitter in 7 innings, would it have counted mentally to him? And Aaron Nola, without hesitation, was like, "No, it's not. It's not. It's not." Right. It doesn't. If it's not a no-hitter, it doesn't count. So I think that's been one of the things that surprises me. I think there's a lot of people, maybe in more sports than there are in other places, where in baseball, numbers and statistics and things like that, they have a sort of magic, a sort of sex appeal, a sort of there's a certain amount of that coming in a shortened season with all of these sort of up in the air things. At first, you think, I don't know. I mean, it's not baseball, but as you get going, I found myself sort of just accepting and moving on and being happy to have baseball.
I'm going to jump in on that. When you talk about the numbers of baseball, there was something that absolutely floored me this past week, and that was the Braves played a game where they scored 11 runs in the second inning, and then scored 18 more in the last 7 innings. 29 runs. Now, granted, 29 that's not the highest ever in a Major League Baseball game, but it's just phenomenal to look at that. You talk about the numbers. That it's just that was my second. That was my second place for the biggest surprise of the year was the fact they scored 11 runs in 1 inning and then topped that as the rest of the game went on.
But the interesting thing about that, Bob, is the Florida Marlins, that was the team that they put those runs up. Yep. They've played, if you take a 6-game picture just of this last week, where they gave up that 29 runs in that gap. What is sometimes they gave up 61 total over the stretch, and they went 4-2.
Right.
Yeah.
There have been I'm waiting to see it the way when this season ends in 2 weeks. What the final numbers of the overall ERAs of these pitchers will be, and whether it's going to be higher, because it has a sense that the ERAs as a whole are higher across the board, and that's just because the number of runs I'm seeing on a regular basis pop up on the scoreboard.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that those runs are not caused by errors, and these are unearned runs. And so to me, that's something that I'm curious to see when the season ends, because that'll paint a picture of either pitchers having more grief in the shortened period of time or defenses not being up to par in this era. And that's going to be an interesting numbers game for me.
I think one of the other things that when I looked at this, that anticipating this season before the stoppage, I think one of the things I was curious was going to see the storyline of the Houston Astros against the Lakers. And, I think that there was a certain expectation that the first month in the season, it was going to be a tough go for the Houston Astros if they were going into other ballparks. And it was, one of the things that whether you consider this a loss or you consider this a gain is we never got to see the fans versus the Houston Astros.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true.
That'll come. I think once fans are allowed back into the stadium, because I was thinking the same thing when the season started. I figure that when fans are returning into the arena, into the stadiums, you are still going to see a holdover from that, because baseball fans have a very long memory.
Couple things. So, since you were talking about the Marlins, the pitcher in that game, Jordan Yamamoto, in that 29-run game, has lined 2 2/3 innings, 13 runs, 11 earned, given up. He's a talented young arm, and they really have a lot riding on him in the future. Yeah. I hope he can rebound from it, because that's the kind of performance that can really devastate you early on in your career.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, when I mean, I was a college pitcher, not for long, but, for a cup of coffee. That's the kind of thing that if you're at his level, if that kind of a game destroys you mentally, you were going to have a problem in the league sooner or later anyway. It's nobody wants to go through that, and nobody should go through that. And when the game starts to get away from you, it is the coach's responsibility to pull you out before it goes crazy.
Absolutely.
That being said, players at that level should have the mental fortitude to be able to, especially as a starter, turn the page and say, I had a bad day, didn't have my stuff, and you got to move on. Between starters and closers, those guys, it tends to be feast or famine. And if you're in the famine era, you got to learn to say, I'll get him next time. So I do hope for his sake, because I've seen him pitch other games, and he's got a nice arm. I've seen him throw. Hopefully he will rebound, because young pitchers like that are what keeps the game going. Right. And it's I'm spoiled as a New York Met fan, and it's funny to say it that way. Watching Jacob deGrom and the way he's able to pitch. So and not that Yamamoto's that kind of player, but you hope that he can rebound and become the pitcher that they expect him to be.
You touched on a couple of things that was leaning toward my surprises at one point. You mentioned the Astros. I was looking at Jose Altuve, who's been all-world hitting and has not shown up this season. Mm-hmm. Turns out he's been fighting injuries. So in that sense, I'm going to go, can't go there. But then we bring up the Marlins. The fact that they may be going to the playoffs with that roster after basically being wiped out by COVID the first 2 weeks of the season, and they were playing with a minor league roster. Give credit. Don Mattingly may be the National League Manager of the Year just because if they get to the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I'll finish the thought, and then I'll let you jump in. My surprise, and this is where Gene, I think, will jump in on this, because Gabe Kapler took a lot of crap as the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. All that talent, 2 500 seasons. Nobody was really thinking Kapler and the move by the San Francisco Giants to make him manager was going to work, especially he was walking on a team that had far inferior talent to what the Phillies had. And yet this team is over 500. This team is probably going to make the playoffs. And they have an MVP candidate, and the unlikely and a hell of a story in his own right, the grandson of Carl Yastrzemski, Mike Yastrzemski, who suddenly has emerged to become a legitimate all-star player. I didn't see that coming. I don't think anybody in the league seen it coming, considering he didn't come into the league till he was 27. Plus the pitching has been there. I think the Giants are probably the unexpected story out of all the teams. And to me, a big surprise is I had them finishing dead last in the National League.
I'll tell you, Gabe Kapler, I think he almost to a certain degree was set up for disaster the way things were in Philadelphia. It just was not an ideal situation for a guy like him to come into. I think that the fans, they're not forgiving of that sort of a guy who is sort of always sunny. I mean, I know there's a TV show that's always sunny.
Sunny in Philadelphia, of course.
But I don't know that it's always sunny for Philadelphia Phillies fans. You know what I mean?
Oh, no. Do we have to bring up a snowball incident with the Eagles? Do we really have to go there? Really?
I was more thinking, I don't know that Phillies fans, after they've been beat, and the bullpen collapses, want to have smoke blown up their rear ends to hear about how those guys are just out there, doing their jobs or watching outfilders trying to do math on those index cards that he used to carry out with as the defenders. But to his credit, I think that Gabe Kapler, not that he was going to ever work out here, but I think that he probably has some idea of what he's doing. And I also think that was a team maybe in San Francisco with very low sort of expectations.
Oh, beyond load coming into the season, no doubt.
I think they were ready to embrace culturally and probably with his sort of style, something completely different. I mean, that was a team that had been competitive for a very long time. And I think they were just ready for that sort of cultural shift. And I think that also a short season when you're trying to just kind of play the math and play the statistics, would this have panned out over 162 games? I don't know. Would they have gone into a sort of swoon? That was sort of the story with Kapler's Phillies. He would have really hot Aprils, Mays into Junes, and then those teams would just collapse. Literally, August, the calendar would change to August, and those teams would fade. So maybe this was also a benefit to his style. He likes, his teams come out hot. But yeah, and having a guy like Mike Yastrzemski certainly doesn't hurt.
I'm going to give you two thoughts on this. The first is with regard to the Marlins. They actually, even though they had a decimated roster, they came out of the box hot, and they in the first 2 weeks of the season, they were not falling apart. They were above 500, so the stand-ins did a hell of a job keeping them in a place where they could continue to be competitive.
And and by the way, that's with a roster where their best players, Alfaro the catcher, their shortstop Miguel Rojas, was not on the team. So it even further enhances your point. They got hot with really the roster that, like I said, is the equivalent of a minor league team.
I wonder partially at the beginning of the season if it wasn't everybody trying to find their way, and pretty much most of the teams were playing 500 ball, and so it kept them in a viable position until the regulars came back. But you got to give credit to these guys anyway. They played the games and they won the games.
Right.
With regards to the Giants, I'm going to throw one side thought out there, and that's that, yes, they've done well and they've played well, and you have to give them credit for that. But beyond the Dodgers, between the two Western divisions, there's not a lot of really strong competition out there. So that's been a help. I'm not saying that's the only reason, because they have played and they've won, but the competition level out there has not been as high as it has been, say, as lopsided in the Central Division, and as cutthroat as it has been in the Eastern divisions. So I give them all the props for winning their games, but I don't know that the level of what they've had to deal with out there has been as high as elsewhere. But it's still, again, you got to play the game. You got to win the game.
Right. And that's an interesting point. I think when the playoffs come around in 2 weeks, it's going to be interesting to see when you sort of put the league back together. Yeah. I mean, the Eastern teams have had to play each other.
Right.
With you've got the defending world champion who's currently in last place.
Yep.
You've got a Yankee team in third. So, I mean, those are the teams I think you probably are thinking might be out in front of their divisions, and they're not there. So you've got an ascending Toronto, you've got an ascending Tampa Bay, you've got a not complete joke of a Baltimore team, you've got Braves who are looking like they're trying to return to form of the 1990s, and then they're going to be playing teams that were out west in a sort of brand new playoff format. I think baseball is going to be a complete crapshoot as to who
absolutely
on top this year.
And I leave the third quarter with this thought. You mentioned the Washington Nationals. They got off to that ridiculously bad start last season and had the incredible turnaround to get to the World Series and win it. This is where the 60-game season really hurts the Nationals, because now it's that what if. What if it had been 160? Could they have done it 2 years in a row? I think, just to sum it up, with the injuries that they had and without Strasburg leading staff, Strasburg and Scherzer. I don't think they would have done it.
No, I don't either. I agree.
Let's go to the fourth quarter. Let's go into college football. No Big Ten, no Pac-12, no football subdivision. Now, the ACC also made an announcement just a couple of days ago that says if less than 8 teams do not finish the regular season in the ACC, the football season for the ACC would be canceled. And so it does raise an interesting question. And sadly, there was one death due to COVID at the Division II level from a player at the University of California, Pennsylvania. Guys, what percentage would you give this season that will actually get to the title game and get a national champion? Bob?
Being optimistic?
Yeah.
10%. No more than that. And I say that because colleges right now are the breeding ground for where COVID cases are kicking up. And the moment you see these COVID cases pop up, schools are going to shut things down in a heartbeat. And I'm not saying the kids are getting it on the campus; they're getting it on the parties off campus that they're wandering out to, and in the non-bubble like material. I don't see 10%, and I think that's being optimistic. I just don't. I think the schools, with the ways that these colleges are run, and the people who are in charge of them, I believe their leaning will be, as soon as they start to see any influx of any sort of a pop up of COVID cases, they're going to shut things down faster than than a steel cage slamming down on you. 10% at the best.
Gene.
I'm a little more. It's funny. I want to use the word optimistic, but I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing. Partly, back to something we talked about earlier, there is so much money in college football.
That's the point I was going to bring out too. Absolutely.
And I think that the NCAA, I think especially some of these programs are so dependent on that cash flow, even in the stunted way in which it's probably coming in, because you certainly don't have gate receipts. I think that they're going to try and unless they absolutely cannot, due to all sorts of other pressures, they are going to try and have some semblance of a national championship. I guess the bigger point being, would you consider this the national championship when you have so many divisions, major divisions, the Pac-12, the Big Ten, just those two right there? How can you really consider this being the national champion when you've got such powerhouses kind of sitting it out? So will it be a version of a national championship? Will it be a version of the college football playoff? Probably. But I don't know that it's going to have the same cachet. I don't know that it's going to carry the same weight. Not to say that it's going to get an asterisk, but
wait a minute. Hang a second, Gene. You don't want to see your college championship being Altoona versus Widener?
And nothing against either school, by the way.
No, nothing against either of them.
Or Altoona, more, I think, to the point, or more devastating, could be something like Clemson versus Altoona. You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting because you're kind of steering to a point I'm going to bring out, but there was reports coming out in the last week. There was pressure being put on the Big Ten to reconsider putting football back out there. I don't think it's going to happen. If it did, I would say there's almost a 100% chance we're going to get through the season, because now you got 4 of the Power 5 in there, and there's a lot more riding on the point you were making, Gene, about the money factor. You put the Big Ten back in the mix, I don't see how they're going to shut it down, even if it gets as bad as it could get.
I'm going to give you a counterpoint to that.
Please.
They shut down the March Madness.
They did.
And think of the money that they make off television alone from March Madness. If they can shut that down, they can shut down the college football.
I'm going to counter the counter in this sense. Because they did it once, I think we now are starting to realize that college sports is big business. Even though we're talking about non-for-profit organizations, we're talking about millions upon millions of dollars. The endowments that come to these universities, how they're paying their employees, a lot of it comes from this. They can take the one hit. Can they afford a second hit? This is going to be the real question as we get on in this season. On a side note, as Gene, you guys were joking about a potential team like Altoona coming into the playoff, I would have loved to have seen the NCAA do this just for this year. You have 3 Power 5 conference teams. Let those conferences who have the champion be in the Final Four, then have a playoff for the 4th spot between Conference USA, the Sun Belt, and the American Athletic Conference, and maybe let the independent Brigham Young, if they have a good enough team, let those 4 play. The winner of those games gets into the Final Four. And the thing about it is, to defend my point, the Big 12 yesterday against Sun Belt Conference teams went 0-3. Arkansas State beat Kansas State. Coastal Carolina beating Kansas, although Kansas is really not that good. But nationally ranked Iowa State did go down yesterday to the University of Louisiana. So on a side note, the parity has already begun, and I think we're going to see a few more upsets as the season goes on for sure.
I think another interesting thing about college football is that you may see these big conferences. I read that they could start as late as almost Halloween, and they'll be able to get in an 8-game season.
So you don't think we're out of the woods yet? You still think maybe, Gene, that somebody's going to change their mind?
I think that there's a lot of pressure from a lot of very high places
Right.
to get this thing through, and they don't have to make the decision today. I mean, they're going to be getting to crunch time, but they were saying that you could wait as long as the end of October. And the interesting thing will be if you bring in these powerhouse teams that have had this much time, maybe to be practicing. I don't know if they're doing anything, but. Then you're going to see these teams come in late, and it could put a real shakeup in the entire process. It's very hard right now to sort of read all the tea leaves because I think there's a lot of factors still yet to be determined.
The dollars and cents are a huge factor. There's
Yes.
no denying it. Everybody wants to talk colleges. Oh, it's all about the kids. We all know when it comes to college sports, it's about the money for the schools.
Yep.
And that is going to be. And I mentioned that earlier when we were talking about. The other material, it's a huge factor and it's a huge complication for the people who are in charge of these schools. And yes, that may be the final determining factor. They say we have to do this. I tend to think that the approach that a lot of these folks have in being overly cautious, not erroneously cautious, but overly cautious for the health and well-being of their students is going to lead them down the path of saying, no, we can't, as soon as something pops, as soon as any little hot spot pops up. That's my opinion.
Something we're definitely going to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
Gentlemen, we're going into overtime to wrap this whole thing up. And since it is NFL Sunday, the first one of the season, it's the appropriate way to go into overtime. It's a very simple question as we take a look at the upcoming season. We already know the Chiefs beat the Texans in the kickoff of the season on Thursday. Prognostication time, Super Bowl, AFC, NFC representatives. Gene, who do you have?
Honestly, I think you're going to see out of the AFC. I don't know that there's anybody as good as the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that they have they're well coached. They have a great roster. They have possibly the best quarterback in the league right now. And watching them on Thursday night, they look as good as anybody as I've ever seen in a position to be ready to repeat. I think it certainly helps that there is the sort of dismantling of the dynasty that was the New England Patriots. You've got Bill Belichick and Cam Newton in New England. It'll be interesting to see how that relationship kind of shakes out. But Tom Brady is no longer in the AFC. He is an NFC quarterback.
Yes, he is.
I think you take that off the board. It's sort of you take that chess piece out of the game. It's kind of right there for Kansas City to repeat out of the AFC. And in the NFC, a heck of a lot more interesting sorts of storylines. You've got now Tom Brady in the NFC with sort of like the geezer squad that they've got going on down there in Tampa Bay with Gronk and LaShawn McCoy. That team in 2011 would have been a real.
There you go. Right.
So it's going to be really interesting. I got to say, Fox has probably got a bonanza on their hands tonight when I think the 4:00 game, the national game, is going to be New Orleans versus Tampa Bay. And I think that you're going to start to see right away whether or not there's something that can happen in Tampa or not. Is there a reason why 40-year-old guys aren't out there every day leading teams to Super Bowls? We'll see. Not that Drew Brees is a young buck. But speaking of New Orleans, I think that they might be my maybe my leader in the clubhouse to go. They're a good squad. They have a great defense, a lot of offensive talent. And if not them, the team I think a lot of people always sleep on, the Seattle Seahawks. I think, believe it or not, Russell Wilson is still underrated. And for some reason, he still catches people off guard. But gun to my head, I'm going to go New Orleans. I'm going to say it's going to be Kansas City versus New Orleans, and Kansas City repeats.
To the all-knowing, all-telling Nostrababus, look into your cards. What do you see?
At this point, since Gene just stole both of my picks, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna talk about the teams they'll play in the championship game.
Fair enough.
Because I agree, Kansas City. I don't see anybody who's as good as Kansas City out there. I have a hard time going against them. Now, that granted, it's early in the year, and everybody knows in the NFL anything can happen over 17 weeks, and when you hit the playoffs. But I don't see anybody unseating them as the season goes along.
Mm-hmm.
I think New Orleans as well is it has a much more difficult road to get there.
Right.
But I think that Drew Brees is going to go out on top. I think, at least as far as his conference is concerned, whether or not he wins the Super Bowl is anybody's guess.
Right.
I'd like to tell you that I'd like to see the Washington no names in there, but I won't say that. I'm happy to tell you that I don't expect to see Tom Brady out there because he is the persona non grata as far as football is concerned for me.
Amen.
I think San Francisco holds an interesting place in the NFC, and I have a feeling they're a team that has been on the rise and has been coming along. Last year they kind of ascended a bit. I think they will be the team that New Orleans goes through to get to the Super Bowl. And on the AFC side, since New England is no longer New England, and I think, quite frankly, even though Belichick is still Belichick, and I want him out of the league too as a Jet fan,
right?
I don't think they're going to provide the same kind of a challenge for other teams as this year goes through. And a surprise team that you might hear me say is this. I think Baltimore is a team that's going to wind up in the championship game against Kansas City. I think Lamar Jackson is going to take that team a long, long way and come up short, but still be in that position again.
I'm going to pull the Bobbis, and I'm going to give you 2 parlay picks, and they will happen by week 6 in the NFL. We will see Tua take over the Miami Dolphin offense in place of Brian Fitzpatrick. Plus, here's the surprise in my book. I just don't feel Gruden is a fan of Carr at quarterback. I got a feeling Mariota will be the starting quarterback at some point this season for the Raiders. And there'll be a major controversy, which will hurt the Raiders' chances of even getting to the playoffs. Meanwhile, I got to go. Rarely do I see a rematch. Just something tells me Garoppolo's got something to prove after just having a not-so-hot playoff. I think he's a better quarterback than people are giving him credit for. And like we all agree, Kansas City right now just looks too damn good. A rematch of the Super Bowl, I got to go with the Chiefs in a repeat, and I will think Andy Reid at that point just steps away into the sunset and goes, back-to-back Super Bowls, what else have I got to prove? I'm done. And that's a good way to wrap up.
You're done. I'm done. Gene's done. We're all done.
Gene, I'll mention it again. It's Podadelphia. You can find the podcast where you find your favorite podcast. Check it out. It's a lot of fun.
We release a new episode every Monday morning.
Thank you very much. And I will definitely have you and Bob back. Bob, good friend, thank you for coming on and doing this.
Thank you.
We will definitely do something probably more toward the end of the NFL season to get ready for the playoffs. Always like to talk sports when I get a chance, so this was a lot of fun. Thanks for spending your Sunday morning with us. For Bob Senkewicz, my buddy Gene from Podadelphia, I'm Rob Akampora. It's a wrap for the A-Game. Well, I'll be back next week. Take care of yourself. Enjoy.